What if I told you, chosen one, that the loudest voice in your circle has been nothing more than an immature liar, terrified, desperate, and begging you to stay silent? Imagine it, their house of cards collapsing, their lies scattering like ashes in the wind, while they claw at the shadows, scrambling to hide what can no longer be hidden. This isn't just gossip. This is spiritual warfare on the highest level, where masks are ripped away and the truth slices sharper than any blade. Comment 777 right now if you're ready for this revelation, because what's about to be exposed will shake you to your core. And to every one of you who stood with us, whether through your comments, your presence, or even through your super thanks, I want to pause and say thank you with all sincerity. Your support keeps this message alive, piercing through the darkness to reach those who need it most. But chosen one, don't blink, because the story doesn't end here. What I'm about to show you is darker, more calculated, and more shocking than anything you've ever seen. And it will reveal exactly why your silence has been their greatest fear all along. God's chosen ones. The shocking truth about this immature liar, why they beg you to stay silent. Imagine, chosen one, the image of a spider watching helplessly as its web disintegrates under a storm it cannot stop, while the insects it once trapped sprout wings and vanish into freedom. That is the crumbling empire of the immature liar, their fragile illusions dissolving in front of their eyes. You are the tempest they never anticipated, the storm that dismantles every false structure they thought was indestructible. The one who once manipulated your kindness into a leash now trembles, because the leash is snapping, and the beast of truth they tried to cage is breaking free. Do you realize what happens when falsehoods collapse under the weight of divine light? Psalm 52:2 describes it clearly. Your tongue plots destruction. It is like a sharpened razor. You who practice deceit, the razor they wielded against you now cuts back through their own schemes. They made you carry burdens that weren't yours, whispering guilt into your spirit until you believed you were the source of their chaos. Yet chaos is returning to them, magnified, like a wave that retreats only to roar back with unstoppable force. Is it not the law of sowing and reaping that Galatians 6-7 declares, "Do not be deceived, God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows." That truth now ripples across their life like cracks spreading through the walls of a decaying fortress. What they mistook as clever manipulation was nothing more than a blueprint of collapse, an architectural flaw destined to bring their own house down. Your compassion was twisted into their weapon, yet every sword cuts both ways. In the great tragedies of history, villains often believe they've secured control, only to find their downfall sealed in their arrogance. Think of Macbeth, the tormented king in Shakespeare's haunting play, who thought power could be seized by treachery, only to drown in paranoia and madness. Isn't that the very fate awaiting this manipulator, haunted by their own schemes, consumed by the shadows they cast? Proverbs 26-27 warns, "Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them." End of say. This is no small unveiling. What is being exposed is not just one liar, but the spiritual architecture of deception itself. Like an ancient cathedral built on rotten stone, the structure was always doomed to collapse. And here you are, standing in the ruins, realizing that the rubble is not your prison but your liberation. The desperation they carry to keep secrets buried has become the very key to your emancipation. Doesn't that make you wonder, how many times did they believe your silence was weakness, when in fact it was the quiet strength of a soul aligned with heaven? Great voices of wisdom have testified to this pattern. The Italian painter Caravaggio once said through his art that true light always exposes shadows too sharp for liars to endure. In his The Calling of Saint Heaven, Matthew, divine light pierces the room, and every shadow trembles. That same light now pierces the corridors of your life, making pretenders scatter like moths caught in fire. And the Apostle John echoes this eternal truth in John 1-5. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Think of nature's metaphors, how the oak tree grows silently underground, roots spreading deep before any branch rises to the sky. All the while, the weeds around it think they dominate the soil. But when the oak finally bursts forth, its canopy dwarfs every shallow plant. That is you now rooted in strength they never recognized. Your patience, once mistaken for naivety, was a resonance of frequencies so high they could not measure it. Like sound waves beyond human hearing, yet strong enough to shatter glass. Romans 12:21 declares, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And that principle has been your hidden weapon all along. There are modern echoes of this battle too. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German pastor who resisted the lies of the Nazi regime, once declared that silence in the face of evil is itself evil. His courage cost him his life. Yet his testimony outlived the tyrants who sought to silence him. Is that not what your manipulator fears, that your truth will echo louder than their lies? Even after their schemes have crumbled to dust, and even among ordinary lives, stories rise. A woman named Clara, unknown to the world, but known in her small village, endured years of betrayal from a friend who siphoned her savings in secret. When the truth emerged, her quiet endurance became her greatest testimony. Clara later said, I realized patience wasn't weakness, it was armor. Just as Isaiah 54:17 promises, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. Her story resounds as a living hymn to your own. Music testifies. In the hymn, Dies Irae, the Latin chant that thundered across medieval cathedrals. The voices cry of the day when secrets are revealed, when justice overtakes pretense. That chant is the soundtrack of this very moment, the liar's trembling day of reckoning. Now the moment is upon you. The liar thought they studied your reactions like specimens in a laboratory, but they forgot that divine equations cannot be measured with earthly tools. The resonance of truth operates on frequencies beyond human calculation, where mercy becomes mathematics, and grace is the architecture of heaven itself. So rise, chosen one. Stand not as the victim they once tried to mold, but as the warrior heaven always knew you were. The storm is yours. The battlefield is already tilting. The mask has shattered, and the verdict has been spoken. It is time to stand up, reclaim your crown, and walk in the authority of one marked by heaven. Every moment you chose love over ego. They carved it into their hidden arsenal, storing your grace as if it were proof they could bend you endlessly. Each time you pursued peace instead of proving yourself right, they treated it as evidence you could be manipulated without limit. But chosen ones do not remain blind forever. Awakening always comes like thunder splitting the sky. Ecclesiastes 3:1 declares, To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. That season has shifted. What was once tolerated will now be torn down. The very discernment that made you see potential in broken people was destined to separate the authentic from the imposter. Hebrews 5:13 affirms, "Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight." Isn't that why the masks fall now? Because the light that once comforted them now reveals their deception. Nature itself mirrors this drama. A viper coils in the grass, confident in its camouflage, until an eagle sweeps overhead, exposing its every movement. That is you, chosen one, the eagle soaring above the field of lies. And doesn't that stir the question how many who posed as allies were truly vipers waiting to strike? What seemed like personal conflict with one unstable individual was never just that. It was a coordinated campaign. Psalm 64:5 unveils their secret counsels. They encourage each other in evil plans. They talk about hiding their snares. They say, "Who will see it?" Yet heaven saw it all. While you extended love, they rehearsed strategies like actors in a twisted play, each role scripted to push you to the edge. The friend who intruded into every sanctuary of your peace was not there by chance. They were placed like pawns on a chessboard of manipulation. History, too, has witnessed such arrogance. Richard Neville, the kingmaker of England, believed he could control crowns and kingdoms by manipulating others. But when both sides turned on him, his schemes collapsed, and he fell on the battlefield, a victim of his own ambition. Proverbs 26:27 resounds, "Whoever digs a pit will fall into it." Is that not the same law echoing through your enemies now? Art sings of this hour. In Shakespeare's Macbeth, a man intoxicated with power thought he could twist fate with lies and murder, only to be devoured by the paranoia of his own hands. That is the destiny of manipulators. Their schemes become their chains. And listen to the thunder of Beethoven's Symphony No. Woo. Its opening notes, short, 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 long like destiny pounding at the door. Can you not feel that rhythm now? Announcing their reckoning, chosen one. The theater is collapsing. Their alliances, their staged whispers, their carefully orchestrated networks, every mask is cracking under the pressure of truth. Romans 8:28 promise. In all things God works for the good of those who love him. Even the betrayals have become building blocks for your authority. Ephesians 6:13 calls you now, therefore put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. Rise. No longer bow under the weight of lies. No longer confuse peace with weakness. You are the eagle above the serpent, the oak breaking through stone, the voice that ends the theater of deception. Stand, chosen one. The verdict is already written. Every casual conversation, every seemingly innocent inquiry, every unexpected encounter in the marketplace, or a sudden late-night message was never accidental. It was a calculated system, a surveillance grid designed to monitor your steps, manipulate your emotions, and eventually neutralize your influence. Yet in all their intricate schemes, they miscalculated one critical element. They assumed kindness meant ignorance, that compassion meant weakness, and that spiritual gifting meant gullibility. But 1 Samuel 16:7 reminds us, man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. They never understood the architecture of your heart was fortified by heaven itself. Their empire of control was built on a fragile foundation like scaffolding erected on sinking ground. While they played with the arithmetic of lies and gaslighting, you operated on the calculus of divine order, resonating at frequencies they could not measure. Isaiah 54:17 thunders through eternity. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. Isn't it striking that every trap they designed only exposed their own instability? The manipulation went deeper than words. They crafted psychological strategies, systematically isolating you from those who truly loved you, poisoning relationships that threatened their dominance, and manufacturing conflicts to push away allies who could discern their facade. Psalm 55:21 paints their portrait. His talk is smooth as butter, yet war is in his heart. His words are more soothing than oil, yet they are drawn swords. They positioned themselves as the only voice of truth in a world they painted as hostile. But their carefully staged play is collapsing under its own weight. Doesn't it make you wonder how many of those concerns were actually daggers wrapped in velvet? Here is where the battlefield became diabolical. This was not only human psychology. They dabbled in the unseen. Practices meant to forge unnatural attachments, intrude on your dreams, and manipulate your energy field in ways that bypassed your conscious defenses. Ephesians 6:12 unmasks it clearly. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And haven't you noticed the obsessive thoughts that seem to appear from nowhere, as if someone else authored them? Ordinary lives bear witness. Maria, a young nurse in a coastal town, once endured years of subtle sabotage by a co-worker who engineered crises just to isolate her. She later confessed, "At first I thought it was a coincidence, but I realized it was design." When truth surfaced, the lies became her testimony of resilience. Her story resounds with Romans 8:28. In all things God works for the good of those who love him. If even the overlooked can turn schemes into crowns, how much more will heaven amplify your victory? And even the language of science and art agrees. A resonant frequency can shatter glass not by force, but by striking its hidden weakness. So too does truth dismantle deception at its fault lines. A cathedral built on cracked stone cannot endure, no matter how ornate its windows or towers. In the same way, their empire of shadows was doomed to collapse the moment divine light touched its foundation. Chosen one. The time of hesitation has ended. Romans 8:31 resounds like a trumpet call. If God is for us, who can be against us? The schemes, the whispers, the manipulations, they were never greater than the authority now blazing in you. So rise. Do not bow beneath their illusions. Stand as the warrior marked by heaven, the living temple whose walls cannot be breached. The verdict is already written. Your victory is not approaching, it is here. The unexplained emotional pulls towards someone your very mind recognized as toxic, the draining of your energy after even the most positive encounters, the fog that clouded your clarity. None of this was a chance. It was orchestrated, engineered through forces darker than most dare to name. They reached beyond simple lies into a realm of spiritual binding and psychic interference, crafting attachments that were never organic. Isn't this exactly what Paul warned in 2 Corinthians 11:14? For Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. They wore the mask of connection while their true intent was to enslave. The confusion you felt about your emotions was not the instability of your spirit, but the artificial influence of techniques designed to mimic love while breeding dependency. They had engineered false spiritual circuitry, rerouting your heart like a hijacked electrical grid. Jeremiah 17:9 tells us, "The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it?" Yet here, the deceit was not yours. It was imposed upon you. Doesn't this explain why leaving them felt nearly impossible? Why your soul screamed danger while your emotions whispered stay? As you struggled inwardly, each private conversation became public currency. Your vulnerabilities were weaponized, stored like arrows for future attack. Your wisdom, poured out in trust, became stolen words, repackaged as their insights, paraded before others to maintain their image of power. Psalm 55:12-13 captures this sting. "If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it, but it is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend." The deepest wound was not the attack from outside, but the betrayal from within. The tactics they used mirrored what architects of war employ: intelligence gathering, coded communication, and psychological conditioning. You were not engaged in a petty quarrel. You were caught in a campaign of spiritual espionage. Doesn't that force the question how many of the coincidences in your story were really coordinated attacks designed to isolate and exhaust you? This same pattern has echoed through history and even the arts. In Shakespeare's Othello, Iago whispered just enough poison to warp love into jealousy, bending Othello's mind until he could no longer tell the truth from manipulation. That is the theater. You were forced into a script of deception, so cunning it blurred reality itself. And still, heaven's truth has the final word. John 8:32 promises, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." The counterfeit soul bond could never withstand eternal light. Voices in our own age have spoken this truth. The theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer once declared, "The ultimate test of a moral society is the kind of world it leaves to its children." He resisted systems of manipulation and control, and though he was silenced by tyrants, his words outlived them. Doesn't that remind you that even stolen wisdom cannot erase the original source? And music has prophesied this battle too. In the haunting strains of Mozart's Requiem, the lacrimosa rises with the sound of judgment and unveiling tears that cleanse, fire that refines, voices that thunder against pretense. It is as though the universe itself composes a score for your story. The liar's borrowed power dissolves under the harmony of truth. Chosen one, understand this. They never truly held your soul, only a counterfeit tether. The illusion of control has shattered. Romans 8:37 declares, "In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us." Rise now. Break every remaining chain of their influence. Your testimony is not one of defeat, but of authority. The energy they hijacked has returned to its rightful owner. Stand, and let the world see what heaven has already decreed. You are free. They were strip mining your very soul like a greedy prospector tearing into sacred ground, extracting resources to fuel their endless campaigns of spiritual warfare. The most insidious part was not simply the theft, but how they weaponized your own values against you. Because you believed in redemption, they staged themselves as worthy of saving. Because you treasured loyalty, they spun webs of guilt whenever you questioned their contradictions. Because you carried the divine gift of seeing potential in broken people, they dangled empty promises of who they might become while never intending to change. Does that not echo the warning in Matthew 7:15? Beware of false prophets. who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. Behind the curtain, this was not one person, but an entire operation. Some were tasked with emotional manipulation, feeding you just enough validation to keep you tethered, then withholding enough to make you insecure. Isn't that why James 1:8 says, "A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways"? Others specialized in environmental sabotage, orchestrating chaos so constant that your focus was drained before you could recognize the coordinated nature of the attack. Still others sharpened their knives for character assassination, releasing carefully crafted whispers about you to anyone who would listen. Doesn't that force the question, how many of the storms around you were never organic but engineered distractions to blind you? The financial aspect was their most diabolical. They sabotaged opportunities, created artificial dependencies, and worked to erode your stability so that you would believe your survival was linked to their approval. Proverbs 22:7 speaks to this entrapment. The borrower is slave to the lender. They sought to enslave your very destiny by keeping you vulnerable, never realizing that heaven had already marked you with provision that cannot be stolen. Nature itself testifies to their strategy. Parasites attach themselves to strong hosts, draining vitality while never creating anything of their own. Isn't that precisely what was happening? They could not generate light, so they feasted on yours, like vines choking an oak tree. They twisted around your values until your strength seemed like weakness, not realizing the oak's roots were still pushing deeper than their reach. History gives us a villainous reflection of this scheme. Alcibiades, the notorious Athenian statesman, charmed his allies with promises of loyalty, yet betrayed Athens, Sparta, and even Persia in turn. His brilliance in manipulation led to temporary power, but his constant treachery left him exiled, hunted, and finally assassinated. What does his story reveal? That those who weaponize trust for personal gain eventually collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. Psalm 37-35, 36 echoes this justice. I have seen a wicked and ruthless man flourishing like a luxuriant native tree, but he soon passed away and was no more. Thence, and doesn't the pattern strike your spirit that every value they turned into a chain is being reforged into your weapon of freedom? Your loyalty now becomes discernment. Your compassion now becomes a shield. Your vision of potential now becomes the sword of truth. Romans 8:28 assure. In all things, God works for the good of those who love Him. Even their sabotage has become the raw material for your awakening. Chosen one. The truth is clear. You were never weak, you were under Ziga. You were never naive, you were targeted for your light. But the stage of their manipulation has collapsed, and the mask has burned away. Rise now, not as their victim, but as heaven's warrior. Ephesians 6:13 thunders, therefore put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. Stand, chosen one, because the war has already shifted in your favor, and your victory is the testimony the world cannot deny. They knew a devastating truth. Spiritually gifted people who achieve financial independence are like fortresses harder to besiege, harder to manipulate, harder to enslave. This is why they struck first at your livelihood. Some of you have discovered, often too late, that they were secretly tampering with your professional relationships, undermining your reputation with colleagues, sowing whispers among clients, planting doubts in the minds of superiors. Isn't this exactly what Nehemiah 6-9 describes, when enemies sought to intimidate him by saying, Their hands will get too weak for the work, and it will not be completed. They tried to weaken your hands, because strong hands build legacies they cannot control. The strategy was surgical. They didn't use blatant lies that could be exposed too easily. Instead, they braided partial truths with carefully manufactured distortions, making their stories believable while slowly eroding the trust you spent years constructing. Isn't that the oldest tactic of the serpent in Genesis 3:1? When he asked Eve, "Did God really say?" twisting the truth just enough to poison the foundation. Their aim was never simply to bruise your income. Their architecture was deeper, to create a structure of dependency, a scaffolding of control, where your very survival seemed chained to their approval. But ask yourself, how many times did you doubt your worth only because someone else carefully engineered that doubt? Notice the precision of their timing. They struck not in ordinary days, but in seasons of transition, when your spirit was breaking into new dimensions, or when your influence had begun to ripple beyond their reach. Times of breakthrough became their chosen battlefield. And doesn't that raise the question, how many of your most confusing storms aligned suspiciously with your seasons of greatest growth? 1 Peter 5-8 warns us, "Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour." They waited for vulnerability, disguising doubt as wisdom, uncertainty as guidance, instability as necessity. And deep down, did you ever wonder why every new victory was quickly followed by an inexplicable wave of sabotage? Psychology calls it conditioning, the repeated association of reward and punishment until the subject internalizes control. They rewarded you with validation only when you aligned with their script, withholding it to keep you insecure. Yet while they treated life as a psychological laboratory, you were actually dwelling in a cathedral of higher design. Divine architecture does not collapse because one stone is shaken. Doesn't Isaiah 2:8 declare, "See, I lay a stone in Zion, a tested stone, a precious cornerstone for a sure foundation. The one who relies on it will never be stricken with panic." But here lies their fatal flaw. Every manipulator eventually reveals themselves. Pride erodes souplitude. Overconfidence breaks the mask. They grew sloppy, arrogant, convinced their conditioning had permanently blinded you. And in their arrogance, they exposed the cracks in their design, like faulty engineering in a skyscraper. Pressure revealed the fractures. Their very attempt to enslave you has become evidence against them. Ordinary lives echo this truth. David, a quiet mechanic from a small village, once shared that his supervisor intentionally sabotaged his work, spreading half-truths to ruin his reputation in the factory. For years, David endured humiliation, until one day the supervisor's arrogance led him to boast openly about his deceit in front of the wrong witness. Justice came swiftly, and David later said, "What was meant to bury me became the ground where my integrity took root." His words echo Romans 8:31. If God is for us, who can be against us? The story resounds like a battlefield symphony. A calm before the storm. Imagine a pause in combat when both armies hold their breath the moment before heaven strikes its decisive blow. That is where you stand now. The silence before victory. The unveiling before triumph. Rise, chosen one. Their scaffolding of control has collapsed. Their mask has cracked. Their pride has betrayed them. Stand in the authority of one whose foundation is Christ, whose economy is heaven, whose destiny is unshakable. Ephesians 6:13 proclame. Therefore put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And this is that day. They thought their training was complete, that they had successfully conditioned you to distrust your own mind, to accept their counterfeit version of reality, to carry guilt for problems they themselves had engineered. They believed you were so thoroughly entangled in their illusion that escape was impossible. But then something shifted. Your spiritual discernment ignited like a wildfire, burning through the fog they thought would blind you forever. Hebrews 5:14 affirms this very moment, but solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. What they miscalculated was that your maturity was never weakness. It was the sword of clarity. Your intuition began connecting dots they never imagined you would notice. Patterns emerged from chaos. Contradictions rang louder than their excuses, and the carefully woven mask unraveled thread by thread. Didn't Jesus warn in Matthew 7:16? By their fruits you will recognize them. Suddenly the fruits of deceit were hanging low and rotting before your very eyes. And doesn't that force the haunting question, how many storms in your life were not natural but manufactured by their hand? Problems were no longer coincidences. They were weather systems tracing back to their shadow. Relationships grew tangled the moment their advice seeped into them. Projects derailed the instant they inserted themselves. As if chaos followed their footsteps like thunder after lightning. Psalm 55:21 echoes the poison. In their words, his talk is smooth as butter. Yet war is in his heart. His words are more soothing than oil. Yet they are drawn swords. Was your peace truly fragile? Or had it been siphoned every time they demanded your attention? Your confidence wavered when they disguised criticism as observation. But then the veil tore. You recognized life's turbulence was not fate testing you, but the echo of their toxic interference in your very energy field. Isn't this why John 10:10 warns? The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. What you thought was life being difficult was the thief at work, hiding behind a mask of concern. The awakening was not gentle, not gradual. It came like lightning shattering, midnight silence, a moment of terrifying beauty. Suddenly you saw the strings they had been pulling, the scripts rehearsed, the roles assigned to unsuspecting participants in their theater of deceit. And doesn't that pierce the soul with the question, how many people you trusted were actually actors reading from their script? The puppet master revealed himself not as the broken soul you thought you were healing, but as the orchestrator of your confusion, the author of your exhaustion. Art has captured this moment. In Verdi's Requiem, the Desiree erupts like thunder, a musical lightning bolt that tears open the sky with judgment. That same force reverberated in your spirit, the divine chord of awakening shaking every false foundation. And history's voices testify as well. Vincent van Gogh, scorned in his lifetime, once wrote in a letter, "What would life be if we had no courage to attempt anything?" He painted light in fields of darkness. And his courage reminds us, awakening is always both devastating and liberating, for light exposes and empowers at once. This was the moment of recognition, painful yet freeing. Your gifts, the very ones they tried to neutralize, activated like weapons forged in fire. Ephesians 6:17 declares, "Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God." The sword in your hand now is sharper than their lies, and the fire in your heart burns brighter than their shadows. Chosen one, rise. No longer shrink under the weight of their theater. No longer accept storms as your destiny. You are the lightning in the night, the one who saw through the mask, the warrior, heaven armed with discernment. The liberation has begun. Stand, because the battle is already turning in your favor. You began to realize the horror. Conversations you thought were sacred and private had become public intelligence, traded like currency among their hidden network. Every confession, every vulnerable word, every whisper of your fears, dreams, and past traumas had been meticulously catalogued, dissected like data in a laboratory, and then strategically weaponized against you. Psalm 55:12-14 captures this betrayal with haunting precision. If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it, but it is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I once enjoyed sweet fellowship. Isn't that the cruelest cut? The dagger comes not from a stranger, but from the hand you trusted most. The most shocking revelation was not only the betrayal of your secrets, but how your very spiritual gifts had been turned against you. Your God-given ability to see potential in people, once a blessing, was exploited to blind you to their actual behavior. They dangled possibilities of who they might become while never becoming it. Does this not echo Jesus' warning in Matthew 7:20? By their fruits you will recognize them. Fruitless branches were presented as orchards, and you, in your compassion, kept watering dead trees. Even your boundless capacity for forgiveness became their favorite tool. Each act of mercy you extended was twisted into permission for them to repeat the offense. They knew you would excuse what should never be excused. Isn't this why Proverbs 26:11 declares, "As a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly"? Yet they counted on your forgiving heart to interpret their folly as growth, when in reality it was deliberate manipulation. Your natural inclination to heal the broken was corrupted into a compulsion to fix someone who had no intention of being healed. They were not stumbling toward wholeness, they were deliberately fracturing themselves to manipulate your compassion. Doesn't that raise the piercing question how many of your projects to heal were really cages designed to trap your heart? John 10:10 unveils the truth. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life, and have it to the full. They were siphoning life while pretending to seek it. They even studied you like a predator stalking prey, mapping your energy patterns, charting the hours when your defenses were lowest, and exploiting the triggers that would produce the responses they craved. It was psychological warfare, calculated like physics, cause and effect, stimulus and reaction. Yet here lies their fatal flaw. While they measured your habits, they forgot to measure the God within you. Isaiah 54:17 thunders against their schemes. No weapon forged against you will prevail, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you. End of quote. Nature itself mirrors this pattern. Just as ivy clings to an ancient wall, stealing its strength while pretending to beautify it, so too did they attach themselves to your life, draining while disguising. But when the wall shakes, the ivy is stripped away, revealing what was solid all along. And doesn't that force the haunting question how much of what you thought was love was actually parasitism? History too provides its villains. Tiberius, the Roman emperor, once cultivated an image of restraint, presenting himself as a wise ruler. Yet behind closed doors, he hoarded secrets, manipulated senators, and orchestrated betrayals to tighten his grip on power. In the end, his paranoia consumed him. isolating him on Capri, where he died, hated and alone. Is that not the fate of manipulators, that their very schemes become the walls of their prison? Yet even in ordinary life, testimonies rise. Sarah, a schoolteacher from a small town, discovered that a trusted friend had been leaking her private struggles to others, twisting them into gossip to control her reputation. When the truth surfaced, Sarah stood before her community and said, "They tried to use my weakness to break me, but it became the stone I stood on." Her words echo Romans 8:28. In all things God works for the good of those who love him. And, chosen one, the awakening has arrived. The puppet strings have snapped. The networks of betrayal have been exposed. Their theater collapses under the weight of truth, and your discernment has become your weapon. Ephesians 6:13 calls you to action. Therefore put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. Rise now, not as the manipulated, but as the liberated. The battle has shifted. Your crown awaits. They knew with surgical precision which words would unravel your confidence, which gestures would keep you tethered, which emotional buttons would trick you into carrying their burdens as if you were somehow responsible for saving them. It was psychological programming disguised as intimacy, a conditioning process designed to blur the line between compassion and captivity. Isn't this exactly what Paul warned in Galatians 5:1? It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm, then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. They wrapped their chains in velvet, but chains remained. The financial manipulation became undeniable as your awakening sharpened your vision. Dots began to connect in ways you could no longer dismiss. Money problems that once looked like bad luck were now traced back to their shadowy fingerprints. Opportunities that mysteriously collapsed often coincided with their subtle interference. Resources that evaporated without explanation matched perfectly with their sudden demands for your attention and energy. Isn't that why Proverbs 13:11 cautions, "Dishonest money dwindles away, but whoever gathers money little by little makes it grow"? They were dismantling your stability, not by accident, but by design, systematically constructing an economic cage to keep you dependent, stripping you of the freedom that financial security bestows. This was architecture of deception, carefully engineered like a building tilted just enough to collapse under pressure. They played the role of rescuer, while secretly loosening the foundation beneath your feet. And doesn't that force the piercing question, how many times did you think God had closed a door, when in truth it was their sabotage, slamming it shut? Psalm 37:21 reminds us, "The wicked borrow and do not repay, but the righteous give generously." Their greed and deceit carried the fingerprints of wickedness, while your generosity was twisted into their leverage. But here is where their blueprint backfired in spectacular fashion. What was meant to break you became the very furnace that forged you. Instead of collapsing under their schemes, the revelation of their deception activated something inside you that had been lying dormant. Isn't that why Isaiah 61:3 proclaims, "To bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair"? From the ashes of their attack, a warrior rose sharper, stronger, unyielding. Your spiritual warrior stepped forward, no longer a patient healer trying to mend what was designed to remain broken. This version of you carried no desire to understand their trauma, excuse their cruelty, or extend yet another chance for them to display humanity they never intended to embrace. You became like a battlefield general in the moment of calm before a decisive strike, no longer distracted by noise, but aligned with clarity. Doesn't that resonate with Romans 8:37? In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. You were never the victim, they were simply the catalyst for your coronation. Ordinary people have walked this path. Elena, a seamstress from a small city, once shared how her partner constantly drained her savings while convincing her that her generosity was proof of love. When she finally uncovered the deception, she said, "I realized my kindness had been weaponized, but in reclaiming it, I discovered my strength." Her testimony mirrors your own. What was stolen became the soil where resilience grew. Chosen one, rise. No longer their healer, no longer their provider, no longer their captive. You are the warrior clothed in discernment, armed with authority, and crowned with unshakable freedom. The ashes have become your anointing. The manipulation has become your testimony. Stand, because heaven's decree has already marked you victorious. This version of you became focused on one thing alone: absolute liberation from their influence and the holy guarding of your energy. They had been feeding off your light like spiritual vampires. But suddenly their feast was over. Not only was their food source cut off, it turned into fire that repelled them. Isaías 40:31 declares, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles." That renewal transformed you into a flame they could no longer touch. The same light they once siphoned now revealed them for what they truly were: desperate, manipulative, spiritually bankrupt. Luke 12:2 confirms this. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. And doesn't that raise the piercing question, were they ever strong on their own, or only powerful because you allowed them to reflect your brilliance? Here is where divine justice showed its hand. In their scramble to replace you, they sought others to feed on. But each attempt failed. Why? Because these new people weren't operating in your realm of compassion and maturity. They weren't chosen ones trained in patience. Instead, they carried ordinary boundaries, and they rejected manipulation outright. Proverbs 10:9 speaks directly to this. Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out. Oh, music captures this unveiling. In the sacred hymn, O Magnum Mysterium, harmonies rise in awe of divine mystery. And in such purity, falsehood cannot survive. Their voice, once cloaked in sweetness, was suddenly heard as discord, and the arts echo this too. Artemisia Gentileschi, the Italian painter, immortalized justice in her masterpiece, Judith slaying Holofernes, a defiant image of truth cutting through oppression. Isn't that the very picture of what happened in your life? When their mask was torn away, history bears its witness as well. Pope John Paul II declared, "The truth must be strong with love, but it must be truth." His life, marked by courage against manipulation and oppression, reflects the same reality. You cannot silence light with lies. And doesn't that force the question, how many times did they think your silence was weakness, when in truth it was gathering into a storm? 1 Peter 2:9 reminds us, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession." Your light was never meant to be drained by parasites. It was meant to expose every shadow. And Romans 8:37 seals it. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Rise now, chosen one. Their game is over. Their mask is shattered. Their stage has collapsed. Stand in your calling, because heaven's decree has already written your victory. The manipulators suddenly found themselves in hostile territory, surrounded by people who had no patience for their sob stories, no interest in their endless trauma dumping, and absolutely no tolerance for the emotional terrorism they had wielded for so long. The stage they once dominated collapsed the moment your light was removed from it. Isn't that exactly why John 3:20 declares, "Everyone who does evil hates the light, and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed." Without the covering of your radiance, their deeds were dragged into daylight, stripped of the disguise that had once made them look spiritual, empathetic, even nobler. Their mask, carefully polished for years, began slipping instantly. No longer could they cloak themselves in your aura. No longer could they appear wise by reflecting your authority. The contrast became stark, undeniable, and humiliating. They had been borrowing your credibility like a parasite feeding on a host. Isn't that why Psalm 36:3 warns, "The words of their mouths are wicked and deceitful. They fail to act wisely or do good." Their words, once accepted, now rang hollow when severed from the gravity of your truth. And doesn't this raise the haunting question, were they ever respected for who they were? Or only for the light you carried? The exposure went deeper than their surface image. The family dynamics they had long hidden behind started cracking under unbearable pressure. Generational patterns they swore didn't exist began to manifest in public arenas where their reputation mattered most. The same toxic behaviors that ran through their bloodline surfaced like weeds bursting through concrete, undeniable and uncontrollable. Numbers 32-23 cuts to the heart of it. Be sure your sin will find you out. What had been contained in shadows now erupted in plain sight. Nature itself reflects this unraveling. When a tree leans on another for support rather than rooting itself deep, the moment the supporting tree is cut down, the weak one collapses. Isn't that the story here? The manipulator could only stand tall because they leaned on your stability without your covering. Their structure toppled like a hollow trunk exposed to the wind. History, too, bears witness to such downfall. King Belshazzar of Babylon feasted in arrogance, using the sacred vessels of the temple to glorify himself. Yet the handwriting appeared on the wall, and that very night his kingdom was taken from him. Daniel 5. Isn't that the same fate awaiting manipulators today, that the symbols they exploit will testify against them when judgment arrives? Without your shield, the manipulator was naked, fragile, and trembling, their borrowed armor shattered, their parasitic cover gone, their dynasty of deceit collapsing under the weight of truth. And doesn't this force one last piercing question? How long did they think divine justice could be delayed? Romans 8:37 declares, "In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us." The manipulator's story ends in exposure, but yours rises in glory. Rise now, chosen one. Do not mourn the mask that fell. Do not grieve the collapse of their illusion. Stand in the authority of one who has walked through fire and emerged as light. The battle has turned. The verdict has been written, and heaven has already crowned you victorious. They could no longer control the narrative, because truth itself was written across every interaction they touched. The carefully rehearsed script they had lived by began to fall apart in their own hands. Their entire network of surveillance, once buzzing with reports, now had nothing left to deliver. Why? Because you stopped reacting. You stopped feeding their provocations. stopped engaging in their manufactured drama, and refused to give the emotional responses that once fueled their counterfeit throne. John 8:30 declares, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." And doesn't that force the question, what happens to manipulators when their audience refuses to play along? Their so-called flying monkeys, once eager to carry gossip, now found themselves running messages to someone who no longer cared, someone who had risen beyond their version of reality. The mechanism faltered. Panic set in. Manipulators only hold sway over those who want something from them: approval, validation, affection, or even the illusion of peace. But the moment you stopped needing anything they could offer, their arsenal crumbled. Proverbs 26:27 warns us, "Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them." Their pit became their own grave. It was like a war general commanding troops in an empty battlefield, orders shouted into the void, weapons useless because no enemy remained. Doesn't that stir the chilling question, how powerless are they when stripped of the stage you once provided? Ecclesiastes 3:14 resounds, "I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing taken from it." God does it so that people will fear him. Their temporary schemes dissolved, while your foundation endured. Then the revelation came like a tidal surge of exposure. Someone in their inner circle, pressed by guilt, by self-preservation, and by divine intervention, broke ranks. The dam burst, and suddenly what they had hidden for years exploded into the open. Numbers 32:23 confirms, "You may be sure that your sin will find you out." And doesn't that raise another haunting question? How many secrets implode not because of attack from without, but because of the rot within? Phone calls spiraled out of control. Messages raced across encrypted threads. Emergency meetings piled up as their carefully woven lattice of lies unraveled faster than they could weave new stories. Their empire of deceit collapsed under its own weight. Revelation colme. Uhdexan promises, "I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you." The truth became its own tidal wave, drowning their false authority. And even in ordinary life, this pattern is seen. Leah, a single mother who once endured years of manipulation from a partner, said, "The moment I stopped needing his approval, his control died." Doesn't her story echo your own, that chains only bind those who agree to carry them? Chosen one, rise. Their empire is drowned. Their secrets have betrayed them. Their mask is gone. Romans 8:37 thunders, "In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us." Stand now not as a survivor of their schemes, but as the conqueror heaven already crowned. The same people who had once marched as loyal soldiers in their cause suddenly began whispering among themselves, comparing notes, and realizing they too had been deceived with the same cold precision once used against you. And here lies the piercing irony of divine justice. The very tactics crafted to silence and destroy you became the very blades that cut into their own circle. Galatians 6:7 resounds like thunder. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Doesn't that force the question, how long can lies stand before they turn on their master? What unfolded was devastating. Allies realized they had been lied to about their roles. Each one fed conflicting versions of the same script. Each one told they were trusted, when in truth they were disposable. Isn't this exactly what Joseph's brothers faced in Genesis 45:4-5, when the brother they betrayed revealed himself? and their conspiracy collapsed under the weight of truth. Now, their betrayal mirrored yours. Except this time the mask slipped fully, revealing a face stripped of charm and drenched in deceit. The exposure wasn't just about hidden lies, it revealed the systematic machinery of deception. Evidence appeared of conversations never meant to be seen, confidential details used as weapons, and friends manipulated into words and actions that betrayed their own values. And doesn't that demand the haunting question how much of what they thought was loyalty was actually exploitation? Psalm 55-21 captures the moment. His talk is smooth as butter, yet war is in his heart. His words are more soothing than oil, yet they are drawn swords. But the spiral didn't stop there. Legal implications surged to the surface. Financial sabotage left undeniable trails. Reputations they destroyed now carried the evidence of deliberate defamation. Proverbs 19:5 warns with perfect clarity, "A false witness will not go unpunished, and whoever pours out lies will not go free." Their empire of deception now entered the territory of consequences, and history's voices echo in harmony with Scripture. Martin Luther King Jr. once declared, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Doesn't that strike the question? Were they ever truly powerful? Or was their empire always waiting to collapse under justice's weight? Even art sings the same story. In Handel's Messiah, the immortal chorus proclaims, "For the Lord God omnipotent reigneth." That cry drowns out every fabricated narrative, thundering across eternity that no throne built on lies will endure. Numbers 32-23 seals their fate. "You may be sure that your sin will find you out." And Romans 8:37 crowns your victory. "In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us." Chosen one, rise. Their schemes have collapsed. Their secrets have betrayed them. Their voices have fallen silent. You are no longer at the mercy of their web. You are the testimony that truth always prevails. Stand now, because heaven has declared you victorious. The so-called spiritual practices they performed without your consent were nothing less than an invisible assault. The kind of violation no earthly courtroom could fully process. Yet spiritual law has never turned a blind eye. Isn't that why Isaiah 54:17 declares, "No weapon forged against you will prevail, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you"? The record of their deeds would not vanish. It was being written in both heaven and history. Documents began to surface, and with them, the mask was ripped away. Screenshots revealed carefully coordinated conversations. Allies aligning their stories like actors in a rigged performance. Financial records traced benefits directly to them. Profits siphoned from opportunities stolen out of your hands. Isn't that chilling how many blessings you thought just slipped away were actually intercepted by their design? Proverbs 10:9 reminds us, "Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out." Their crooked path now lay open for all to see. Darker was the evidence of supernatural tampering, rituals designed to mimic intimacy, practices meant to forge artificial attachments, strategies that manipulated your energy like a farmer twisting water toward poisoned fields. Doesn't that raise the haunting question how much of the confusion you felt was not weakness, but the residue of their interference? 2 Corinthians 11:14 warns, "And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light." They masqueraded in false light, but their shadow betrayed them. The scope of their operation sprawled beyond what even they could contain. So many moving pieces, So many lies layered on lies, until they themselves drowned in the chaos they created. And here lies the damning irony. In their arrogance, they documented everything. They wrote down strategies, boasted in group chats about their psychological warfare, even recorded their own conversations where they gloated about keeping you confused and dependent. Doesn't that mirror Haman in Esther 7:10, who built gallows for another only to hang upon them himself? The trap they designed became their judgment. Their boasting became the very evidence of their downfall. In bragging about control, they testified against themselves. In flaunting their false victories, they displayed their real defeat. Psalm 7:15 echoes the scene. Whoever digs a hole and scoops it out falls into the pit they have made. Their pit was now swallowing them whole. As investigators widened their net, multiple jurisdictions began circling. What began as personal drama was exposed as something far more sinister, a coordinated pattern stretching across borders, entangling countless victims. Doesn't that stir the question how many others suffered in silence until your revelation brought everything into the light? Nature itself tells the same story. Parasites that gorge themselves too long on one host eventually weaken and perish when the host shakes free. Without your energy, their system collapsed, revealing what it always was, a hollow shell. History, too, gives us cautionary examples. Girolamo Savonarola, the fiery preacher of Renaissance Florence, once manipulated fear and claimed divine authority, but his arrogance and need to boast drew the wrath of both church and people. In the end, his own words became the noose that silenced him forever. Doesn't that prove the truth that boasting is always the seed of downfall? Chosen one, rise. Their empire of shadows has been catalogued, exposed, and condemned. Their secrets have betrayed them. Their arrogance has testified against them. Romans 8:37 crowns you with victory. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Stand now, not as their victim, but as heaven's vindicated warrior, the one their records could not erase, and the one their schemes could not destroy. The spiritual warfare they believed was invisible left behind unmistakable imprints, energetic signatures that, like frequencies on a spectrogram, trained eyes could trace back to their source. Their shadows were recorded in resonance they could never erase. Doesn't Ephesians 6:12 remind us? For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. What they thought was hidden was already vibrating in heaven's register. You were never meant to endure this battlefield in isolation. What looked like exile was preparation. What felt like abandonment was orchestration. The family of the chosen has always been scattered, yet God gathers his remnant. Just as Elijah thought he was the only prophet left, only to hear in 1 Kings 19:18 that 7,000 had not bowed to Baal. Your story echoes the same. You are not alone. Never have been. Never will be. Isn't that the question their deception tried hardest to bury? Are you really isolated? Or are you secretly being aligned with an army? And this alignment shows itself even in ordinary lives. Marta, a retired nurse from Lisbon, once shared how she carried visions since childhood, but hid them under fear of ridicule. Only when she met others with the same scars did she say, "My exile wasn't rejection, it was training." Doesn't her testimony mirror yours, that the wilderness is not punishment, but consecration? Isaiah 3:9 promises, "See, I am doing a new thing, now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? The exposure of their operation revealed itself as more than petty drama. The timing of their attacks was calculated like physics, precise as a pendulum swing. The way they isolated you mirrored architectural design walls, raised stone by stone, to corral you into their blueprint of control. But their very scaffolding betrayed them. Colossiens 2:15 record. Having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. Isn't this the same scene repeating now, the architects of deception exposed on the very stage they built? They had studied your responses like a scientist observing specimens, analyzing emotional triggers and mapping patterns of reaction. Their calculations went beyond ordinary psychology, reaching into spiritual darkness most people fear to name. But didn't Jesus say in Luke 12:2, "There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known"? Even the frequencies of their plots began to betray them, broadcasting the evidence of their desperation. Their panic rose to fever pitch, for exposure meant more than embarrassment. It meant judgment. And doesn't this demand the question, how terrifying is it when those who built their kingdom in shadows suddenly realize the light is not only coming, it is already here? Psalm 27:1 answers with thunder. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? Chosen one, rise. You are not a victim of exile. You are a graduate of refinement. You were not abandoned. You were set apart. Their schemes have collapsed under the resonance of heaven's justice. Romans 8:37 crowns your journey. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Stand now, because their invisible war has become their visible defeat, and your hidden wounds have become your eternal weapon. It was poised to annihilate the false identity they had so carefully constructed, the persona that people admired, the reputation they paraded, the influence they accumulated. All of it was about to vanish into smoke. Why? Because it was all built on lies. And the walls of deceit cannot stand when truth begins to thunder. Proverbs 2:19 declares, "Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue lasts only a moment." Doesn't that pierce through every illusion? How can a kingdom built on falsehood survive the weight of eternity? The moment the lies began to crumble, their panic became a spectacle. They begged people to stay silent, shifting from manipulation to outright bribery. They offered tears, promises, threats, even painted themselves as martyrs of circumstance. Isaiah 5:20 warns, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness." Isn't that exactly what they tried to do, convince others that silence was righteous and exposure was cruel? Yet, the silence that once protected them became their loudest accusation. Their desperation turned grotesque. They promised to change, threatened divine consequences, played the eternal victim, and even argued that revealing the truth would harm innocent bystanders. But doesn't John 8:44 uncover their tactics? When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Lies were their mother tongue, yet now truth had become a consuming fire. Networks of enablers disintegrated as quickly as their web of deception. Former allies refused to shield them, and the very stage that once applauded them fell silent. They scrambled to reach out to people they hadn't spoken to in years, dragging ghosts of the past to rewrite history. Isn't that the haunting question? How desperate must someone be to resurrect long-buried relationships just to protect a collapsing image? Ecclesiastes 7:29 echoes, God created mankind upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes, and their panic spilled into the night. Phone calls at ungodly hours, frantic messages, carefully crafted sob stories designed to provoke sympathy, each one a failed attempt to keep secrets locked away. They bribed with money, favors, emotional reconciliation. But the house of cards had already collapsed. And doesn't this remind you of Haman in Esther 7:10, who begged for his life only to be executed on the very gallows he had built for another? Their begging exposed their defeat more than their silence ever could. The arts testify to such unraveling. In the solemn tones of Allegri's Miserere, the repeated cry, Miserere me, Deus, have mercy on me, O God, echoes the posture of the guilty when their secrets are laid bare. They too cried for mercy, not from repentance, but from fear of exposure, and history's voices add weight. Pope Benedict XVI once said, "The truth is not determined by majority vote." Isn't that the fatal blow? No matter how many allies they rallied, the truth was never theirs to silence. Chosen one, rise. Their lies are dismantled. Their begging has become their confession. Their bribes have testified against them. Psalm 37:6 proclaims, He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. You are not here to cower in their shadows, but to stand in the brilliance of heaven's justice. Romans 8:37 seals it. In all these things we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us. Stand, for their mask has fallen, and your victory has already been decreed. The irony was staggering. They begged for the very mercy they had never once extended to you. The same lips that spread slander now trembled with pleas. The same hands that tried to dismantle your peace and destroy your reputation now offered to repair what they had broken. They promised to pay back stolen resources, to retract poisonous lies, to disappear forever if only people would stop unveiling their deeds. But the chosen one, Proverbs 26:27 declares, whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them. And doesn't that provoke the question, how can they demand protection from the very truth they once weaponized? The beauty in this collapse was profound. You did nothing to make it happen. You didn't need to fight, expose, or even waste thought on them. The moment you withdrew your energy from their chaos and stepped fully into your authentic power, heaven began orchestrating the downfall. Truth carries its own momentum, while lies are parasites that demand constant energy to survive. Isn't that why Isaiah 54:17 proclaims, no weapon forged against you will prevail, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you? They collapsed, not because of your vengeance, but because their false empire could no longer feed on your light. Nature itself paints the picture. A vine that strangles a tree for years eventually withers once the tree shakes it free, starved of the life it stole. Isn't that the same pattern here? The manipulator who fed on your strength now, choking on the emptiness left behind. Psalm 7:15 reminds us, whoever digs a hole and scoops it out falls into the pit they have made. Their pit was waiting, and into it they stumbled. History offers echoes. King Saul, consumed by jealousy of David, once tried to extinguish the light of God's anointed, yet in the end, Saul fell on his own sword, 1 Samuel 31:4. Undone not by David's vengeance, but by the weight of his own corruption. Isn't that the same fatal trajectory manipulators walk? The very schemes they design become the snare that seals their fate. Meanwhile, your story expanded in glory. As they scrambled to salvage collapsing relationships, you found yourself surrounded by authentic connections that honored your soul. As they struggled to cling to credibility with reputations in ruins, your integrity became a beacon of contrast. While they questioned everything about themselves, you stood crowned in certainty. And while they sat in the suffocating darkness of spiritual bankruptcy, your light radiated with unstoppable force. John 1-5 affirms it, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." But here lies the ultimate power. You didn't fall. They did. You didn't crumble. They did. You didn't beg for silence. They did. Romans 8:37 seals the decree. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Rise, chosen one. The stage is cleared. Their voices silenced. Your destiny undeniable. You didn't become vindictive or cruel in your victory. You didn't dance on their grave or gloat over their collapse. Instead, you embodied the very qualities they tried so relentlessly to crush: grace under pressure, strength without aggression, power without vengeance. Proverbs 24:17 warns. Do not gloat when your enemy falls, when they stumble. Do not let your heart rejoice. And isn't that the piercing irony that by refusing to mirror their malice, you revealed the radiant contrast between light and darkness? Your response to their spiritual assault became a masterclass in how divinely aligned souls move through opposition. The energy once wasted trying to decode their contradictions was rechanneled into pursuing your sacred purpose. The emotional bandwidth you once spent managing their chaos became available to build the life heaven designed for you. Isaiah 61:3 proclaims, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning. Doesn't that beg the question, what greater vindication is there than thriving in the very areas they tried to suffocate? In the natural sciences, there's a parallel. Pressure transforms carbon into diamond, heat tempers steel. In physics, resonance amplifies sound waves until they can shatter glass. Isn't that what happened here? The pressure that should have destroyed you only crystallized your gifts into unbreakable form. The boundaries they mocked as weakness became unshakable fortresses. The discernment they tried to blur became sharper than a blade. Hebrews 5:14 confirms it. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. And stories from ordinary people echo this truth. Luis, a humble carpenter from Barcelona, once endured years of manipulation from a corrupt employer. He said, "That betrayal taught me where my strength actually lived inside, not in their approval." Isn't that the same wisdom your trial etched into your soul, that the true source of your authority is internal, divine, unshakable? Others who once sided with your enemy began approaching you with apologies, explanations, and requests for forgiveness. Some carried genuine remorse, realizing they had been pawns in a spiritually abusive campaign. Others simply wanted to reposition themselves near someone they now recognized as carrying real authority. Your response to both was the same: wisdom tempered by discernment. 1 John 4:1 reminds us, "Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God." And doesn't this reveal the deeper lesson that not everyone who seeks reconciliation is truly repentant? Most importantly, You realized this ordeal wasn't a detour from your spiritual path. It was the very forge that shaped it. The manipulation you endured became the blueprint for recognizing subtle attacks. The deception you survived became your manual for guiding others. The isolation you faced became the doorway into a deeper communion with your source than comfort ever could have offered. James 1:3-4 declares, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. The person who emerged from this crucible was not the same person who entered it. You were forged in fire, tested under unrelenting pressure, refined like gold until only your most authentic, radiant self remained. The compassionate soul they mistook for weakness arose as a spiritual warrior they could never defeat. And isn't that the ultimate reversal? The one they thought they were breaking became the one heaven had been building. Romans 8:37 seals it. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Oh, chosen one, rise. Their weapons became your wisdom. Their betrayal became your breakthrough. Their persecution became your preparation. You are not only a survivor, you are the warrior who carries the proof that God's fire refines, but never consumes. Stand now, because heaven has declared you unshakable. The understanding soul they once exploited rose into someone who not only knows how to defend themselves, but also how to shield others from the same assaults. Remember how it began. Chosen one, you walked in with flexibility, understanding, and patience, offering grace to someone who mistook your openness for weakness. Eclesiastes 7:12 reminds us, wisdom preserves those who have it. And isn't that the piercing truth here, that wisdom without boundaries is not preservation but slow destruction? Flexibility without discernment becomes surrender. And surrender to manipulation, masquerading as spirituality, is not holiness but bondage. The compassion you showed was genuine, but it was never meant to be drained endlessly for someone committed to darkness. The patience you carried was noble, but it was never designed to be infinite for those who mocked your endurance. Isn't that the question every chosen one faces? How long before patience transforms into chains? James 1:19 commands, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Yet it never instructs you to let others weaponize your goodness. You entered this trial as someone who bent so far backward, you nearly broke your own spine. You exit it as someone whose compassion is protected by discernment, whose love is armored by wisdom, whose light is shielded by boundaries that honor both your purpose and your peace. The flexibility that once made you a target is now refined into strength that serves your highest good rather than others' exploitation. Doesn't that raise the question, what power can manipulation truly hold when its prey becomes unshakable? Psalm 18:30 assures us, as for God, his way is perfect. The Lord's word is flawless. He shields all who take refuge in him. History itself testifies to this truth. Nelson Mandela, after decades of unjust imprisonment, said, "I never lose. I either win or learn." Isn't that the very essence of your transformation? The attacks that should have broken you instead became the lessons that refined you. Hebrews 5:14 confirms it. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. Your discernment, once seen as naivety, is now a weapon sharper than any blade. Sacred art and music echo the same revelation. In Palestrina's Missa Papae Marcelli, soft harmonies build into radiant strength. proving that restraint is not weakness, but the foundation for enduring power. Doesn't that mirror your transformation, silent endurance, birthing victorious radiance? The generational curses they carried, the toxic patterns they refused to release, the spiritual shadows they embraced, none of it could extinguish the flame that belongs to you. John 1:5 declares, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Their attempts to drag you down only revealed how high above their reach you truly stand. Now you stand as living proof. Chosen ones cannot be permanently derailed by human schemes. No matter how sophisticated or coordinated, you are the testimony that trials are not detours, but divine architecture. Chiseling stone into a cathedral. Romans 8:37 seals your decree. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Rise now, chosen one, because your very existence proclaims that grace cannot be corrupted, light cannot be extinguished, and truth cannot be defeated. You prove beyond doubt that those truly connected to the divine source cannot be spiritually assassinated by wounded egos or demonic schemes. Isn't that the essence of John 1-5? The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. You are the embodiment of light, refusing to apologize for being radiant. The immature liar's greatest secret is exposed, but the greater revelation is what surfaced about your own power in the process. They tried to convince you that you were too much, too intense, too spiritual, too aware, too demanding of respect and honesty. Yet Isaiah 60 resounds, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." And doesn't this raise the piercing question, were you ever too much? Or were they simply too small to handle the weight of your calling? The truth is clear. You were exactly enough for those who deserved access to your energy, and far too much for those who sought only to exploit it. Their desperate attempts to hide secrets became accelerants for their own downfall, like a tree rotting from the inside. Every effort to preserve the facade only hastened its collapse. Isn't that the brutal irony, that every lie told about you became a prophecy of their own corruption? Proverbs 19:9 declares, "A false witness will not go unpunished, and whoever pours out lies will perish." Lies cannot withstand the weight of eternity. They suffocate the liars who breathe them. The people they recruited as pawns turned against them. Manipulation was their net. But every fish escaped through the holes. Eventually, those deceived began questioning not you, but their own judgment, forever partnering with deception. Doesn't that echo Psalm 7:15? "Whoever digs a hole and scoops it out falls into the pit they have made." Their pit has become their prison, their lies, their chains. History gives us another shadowed figure, Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus with a kiss. He thought his scheme would end in profit, but it ended in despair. His name eternally etched as a cautionary tale. Isn't that the same outcome manipulators face? Their attempts to assassinate light only become monuments of their own destruction. Nature itself affirms your triumph. The moth, drawn to flame, is consumed by what it cannot comprehend. The liar, drawn to your brilliance, was scorched by the very radiance they mocked. Romans 8:37 seals the truth. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Chosen one. This is not merely your victory story, it is your origin story. The gifts they tried to corrupt became sacred powers to be guarded. The love they tried to drain became divine currency to be invested with wisdom. The purpose they tried to fracture became a mission completed in spiritual authority. The one they tried to break became unbreakable. The light they tried to dim became blinding. And doesn't this demand the question, who can stand against the chosen when God himself has marked them? Now rise. Their darkness has collapsed into itself, but your radiance stands unshakable. This is not the end of your journey, it is the unveiling of your destiny. Chosen one. The shocking truth has already been revealed. The immature liar who schemed against you has been exposed, and their silence is no longer your burden. What they meant for harm became the very forge of your strength. What they tried to bury has now become your testimony. John 8:32 declares, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." You stand today as living proof that no lie can smother the destiny of those chosen by God. This isn't just their downfall, it's your awakening. Every attack became your elevation. Every betrayal became your refinement. And every shadow only made your light more undeniable. Romans 8:1 reminds us, if God is for us, who can be against us? Their whispers fade. But your voice carries heaven's authority. If this message has spoken to your spirit, don't let it end here. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your engagement is not just support for this channel, it's a declaration that truth will never be silenced. Comment 777 if you're standing in alignment with heaven's justice today. And to every single one of you, whether you've supported with a super thanks or simply by your presence here, know this: your support means more than words can measure. And I thank you from the depths of my heart. As you leave today, may the Lord bless you. May He keep you. May His face shine upon you and grant you peace. You are chosen. You are covered. And you are unstoppable.